The clock on her laptop read 11:47 at night. She had been comparing blenders for nearly an hour when she finally closed the tab. The kitchen counter remained empty, and the old blender was still sitting there leaking. A simple household decision had somehow grown into an exhausting test of personal judgment. Why does wanting to choose wisely so often lead to choosing nothing at all? If you have ever spent more time selecting a movie than actually watching one, you already know this quiet paralysis. The image is ordinary: a cursor hovering over a list of options, a phone screen glowing in a dark room, a person frozen in a grocery aisle. The feeling falls somewhere between guilt and embarrassment, even though no one else is watching. And yet the mind keeps grinding, convinced that just a little more research will finally reveal the right answer. The obvious advice arrives fast, usually from someone who has just watched you struggle. Just stop overthinking it, they say, as if the worry were a light switch you could flip. But that advice misses something important, because overthinking a decision often begins as a deeply responsible effort to get things right. To understand the trap, we need to separate productive carefulness from a pattern psychologists call analysis paralysis. Analysis paralysis is when the act of choosing becomes so tangled in endless comparison that forward movement stops completely. It does not feel like laziness, because the brain is working very hard the entire time. It feels like preparing, except the preparation never reaches its natural end. One famous experiment by researchers Sheena Iyengar and Lepper placed a display of jams inside a grocery store. On some days, shoppers saw 6 varieties of jam, and on other days they saw 24 different varieties. Shoppers approached the larger display more often, drawn by the colorful abundance of choice. But when it came time to actually buy a jar, the people who saw only 6 options were 10 times more likely to make a purchase. More options made choosing harder, not easier, and the cost was measured in abandoned decisions. When the mind faces too many alternatives, it begins comparing every feature against every other feature until the differences become overwhelming. A blender is no longer just a blender under those conditions. It becomes horsepower, blade material, noise level, warranty length, and 300 customer reviews that flatly contradict one another. The woman in front of her screen was not simply studying blenders that night. She was hunting for a perfect object that might not actually exist anywhere in the real world. She was caught in what psychologist Barry Schwartz later described as maximization. Maximizers are people driven to make the best possible choice, so they explore every option until exhaustion. Their opposite, satisficers, set standards that are good enough and choose the first option that clears that reasonable bar. The vocabulary feels academic, but the difference shows us up every time a satisficer picks a restaurant in 2 minutes, while a maximizer is still scrolling 20 streets away. Here is the first real turn. Maximizers often achieve objectively better results in life. Research indicates they find jobs with higher starting salaries and negotiate better financial deals. But despite those clear wins, maximizers consistently report more regret, more anxiety, and lower life satisfaction than satisficers do. The puzzle deepens. Why would getting more of what you want leave you feeling worse inside? Part of the answer lives in a mental habit psychologists call counterfactual thinking. Counterfactual thinking is the mind's ability to vividly imagine events that never actually happened. After a maximizer chooses a coffee maker, the machines they did not purchase do not simply vanish from their thoughts. They hover in the background, still glowing with the potential that the chosen model might somehow lack. Every abandoned option becomes a silent measuring stick that makes the actual purchase fall short. The blender she finally buys must therefore compete with every blender she left behind. And because she spent so long studying those other blenders, she knows exactly what she is missing. An hour of comparison shopping gave her more information, but it also gave her more material for future regret. Beneath that deep regret lies a second mechanism, an intolerance for uncertainty. Some decisions have clear answers, but most everyday choices involve real unknowns. A satisficer can tolerate that uncertainty, accepting that a decent blender will probably work just fine. A maximizer experiences the very same uncertainty as a threat that must be neutralized through more information. The search for information then becomes soothing in the short term because it creates the illusion of control. With each review read, the anxious knot loosens slightly, and the brain registers a small but definite reward. But when the information runs out or the contradictions pile up, the anxiety returns even stronger. The only familiar remedy is to read still more reviews, and the cycle tightens again. This cycle is a close cousin of what therapists observe in rumination. Rumination is the repeated running of the same thoughts in the hope of reaching a resolution that the thoughts alone can never provide. You can see it when someone replays a conversation long after it ends or wrestles with a decision that has already been made. Psychologists distinguish rumination from productive reflection by one key feature. Rumination does not lead to a new plan of action. It just replays the old questions over and over, tightening the knot a little more each time. That is why the woman in front of the blender reviews felt busy and responsible, while actually standing perfectly still. She was not making progress. She was managing the uncomfortable feeling of not having decided. This brings us to an even deeper layer of the pattern. Overthinking a decision is rarely about the practical decision itself. It is often about what the chooser believes the decision will reveal, about her intelligence, her competence, or her basic worth. A blender is just a blender, but a bad blender can feel like public proof of being a bad chooser. When a small purchase starts carrying that much psychological weight, no amount of research can lighten the load. The fear driving the search is not really the fear of a broken blender. It is the fear of the sharp regret that would arrive right alongside it. We returned to her on that Tuesday night, shoulders tired and eyes dry. The clock has silently moved past midnight without her noticing. If someone had asked what she was doing, she would have said she was just trying to get it right. But deep inside the pattern, what she was really doing was trying to make herself completely regret-proof. She wanted a guarantee that the future version of herself would look back and whisper, "You chose perfectly." That guarantee does not exist, and the hunt for it had turned a simple purchase into a silent ordeal. Now look closely at the moment she finally clicks away without buying anything at all. That moment is not a failure of willpower or a character flaw. It is the logical endpoint of a process that turned choosing into an impossible demand. When every option must be perfect, no ordinary options survives the inspection. The most surprising finding in the research is that this paralysis often strikes hardest when the stakes are objectively lowest. A person who can choose a spouse or a career with reasonable confidence might be flattened for hours by a menu, a streaming queue, or a pair of headphones. Here is the central reversal, the turn that changes the meaning of everything she experienced that night. Overthinking decisions is not fundamentally a thinking problem at all. It is an emotion regulation problem dressed in the convincing costume of careful analysis. The endless comparison, the scrolling, the reopened tabs, all of it is a way to postpone the experience of uncertainty and the possibility of future regret. And in the very act of postponing, she was already experiencing the regret she feared so deeply. She felt the sting of missed time, the quiet shame of indecision, the exhaustion of a mind that could not rest. The thing she wanted to avoid had already arrived, not because of a bad choice, but because of no choice at all. This insight does not make the pattern vanish overnight, but it does give it a recognizable and workable shape. When you can name the fear underneath the the thinking itself loses some of its authority over your actions. Now return to the empty kitchen counter one more time the following weekend. The woman we have been watching opens her laptop again, but she does something noticeably different this time. Before she types a single word into the search bar, she writes down on a scrap of paper exactly what good enough looks like. Good enough means a blender that makes smoothies, costs under a certain amount, and has a warranty of at least 1 year. With that clear list beside her, she gives herself 20 minutes to find a match. The timer is not a restriction at all. It is a permission slip to stop when the honest conditions are met. She picks a blender in 14 minutes, and the act of purchasing feels almost startlingly ordinary. A week later, the blender sits on the counter, quietly doing what blenders are designed to do. She does not think about it much anymore, because blenders are not supposed to be monuments to perfect judgment. That small shift, from searching for the best to searching for the good enough, is what Herbert Simon meant by satisficing. Satisficing is not settling for less. It is designing a personal standard that serves your life instead of draining it away. None of this means that careful thinking is a mistake to avoid. Careful thinking becomes a trap only when it masks a fear that thinking alone cannot resolve.